So good morning, everyone. Actually, it's afternoon now, morning for me still, but I'm going to flip-flop a few things, and we were going to be doing our lens design first class. There's quite a few technical pieces of information that we're going to need to catch up with, and we'll come back to that. But instead of doing that, I'm going to have you look at your macro photography assignment and get started with that today. There are going to be four things that you'll need to photograph as a part of that assignment. We'll look at the assignment sheet in just a few minutes, but I'm going to look at some macro photographs first of all and talk a little bit about that. The assignment 11/22/03, I'm going to keep the deadline the same as it is, but do want you to start working on that. You're going to need to photograph a piece of jewelry, and doing that in a kind of creative way is going to be really cool. Image like this, very shallow depth of field, but we've still got luminosity through that stone, so we can see light shining through the stone. Friendship rings, and Ben Massey, a former student, did this, and we spoke for a long time trying to think of a creative way to photograph these rings, and the clenched hands, the hands together, and a real sense of strength here. That is a very kind of masculine feeling photograph to this one. Photographing text from an old book, and there are different ways that you could do that. Here, thinking about the angle that you've got the text running at, and we've very often spoken about tilting a camera 30 degrees, 60 degrees. At 45 degrees, it's too much. But actually, when it's at this kind of angle, it adds dynamism and can look really cool. Another interesting aspect of this, shallow depth of field, but we're picking out just single words. And as you start playing around with this, you'll probably see combinations of words that work really well. And that's one thing I really love about this photograph and this photograph as well. Vague, it is vague. Everything above the word vague is unseeable, really, unreadable. But this image lined up precisely with the edge of the frame. One thing to watch with shallow depth of field, which you will be playing with macro photography, there's almost like this line that is drawn through the point of where things are in focus. But this is a really interesting picture to me. You'll be photographing a plant, an insect, and these are kind of former student images. I'm going to go back and just look at a few other shots as well. This is not a student shot, but insects, just extraordinary detail that we can actually see. And it may be that you'll be able to find a dead insect and then photograph that, pull it into the studio, light it in a really cool way, and play around with different techniques that you might be able to find. I've got quite a few images on this little PowerPoint that I've got here, and let me see, I'm not going to go through everything. This shot makes me think that it's the inspiration for some of the Star Wars characters, especially in that first Star Wars movie. Very shallow depth of field, and really to achieve what I want you to do with this assignment is not to use any of your own equipment unless you have a real technical macro lens. Macro 1:1 ratio magnification, and that's to say that the image on your image sensor, if you were to be able to take it out and look at the image sensor, would be actual real size, the same size as in real life, and that would be ideal for what we're looking at. We're going to think about the various pieces of equipment that you're going to need, and Miss Henderson's going to make available our macro lenses for you, so you could use a macro lens or an extension tube, and we're going to look at those in just a minute as well. All of the lighting and compositional things that we've spoken about already through the program are going to come into play as we think about macro photography. And just because you're looking at something that is tiny and it is quite magical, it doesn't mean to say that all of our compositional rules are not actually at play. They most certainly are. And if you were photographing a grand vista, like I'm hoping, you've got some really great pictures from your landscape assignment, but compositionally, the structure of the image should be the same kind of thing, regardless as to whether you're photographing a grand vista or something really, really small. It might be one of my favorites. I'm going to direct you to a couple of other videos in just a minute, but some of the techniques that we're learning, we're going to be able to apply to food photography, and that's something that we'll come back to in our commercial classes. Jewelry that we've already spoken about, and other technical areas where macro photography would come into play is medical photography, and I searched long and hard to find some photographs that were not totally gruesome, and also photographs of snowflakes become possible as well, and this is really quite a magical kind of area of photography to think about. So all of these are snowflakes. All right, might be a little bit muddly here as I switch from one program to the other. YouTube, you could do your own search. Don Komarek, and I'm probably saying his name wrong there, making mincemeat of it, has put together some great videos on macro photography, and he's the guy that's done a lot of work with snowflakes, so that would be worth looking up. DP Review is a good go-to, and if you Google DP Review macro photography, you can get more inspiration there. There's a lot of kind of methods and techniques that you can use as well. And certainly what I would do is don't be afraid of bumping up your ISO a little bit. Shut aperture down just a touch so you can max out a little bit on the potential of shallow depth of field, but you most certainly are going to be dealing with shallow depth of field with this. And watch out for camera shake. If that shutter speed gets too low, you're going to be dealing with camera shake issues there as well, and that's not what you want to do. Pieces of equipment to consider: a ring light, and traditionally a ring light will be what's used for macro photography. The idea here is that the light itself is located at the end of the lens so that you're lighting something that's right close to the front of the lens and there are no shadows from it. If you imagine if you had your regular flash on the top of the camera here, the shadow of the front of the lens would fall across the thing that you're photographing. So the ring flash avoids that. So these are pieces of equipment that are worth being aware of. This type of ring flash, you can adjust the power output from one side to the other. And so you've got control of directionality of the light. The older style ring lights give you a shadowless light, as we have with the homemade ring light that we have for portrait in the portrait studio. That if this is something you want to get into and do more of, that's going to be worth looking at. Extension tubes, and the extension tubes, they normally come in sets of 3, 36, 20 and 12 millimeters respectively. These fit between the camera body, the camera body, the camera body and your lens here. So at minimum, I want you to be using either a macro lens, we'll look at it in a minute, or an extension tube. Generally speaking, you'd fix it to the camera body first and then put the lens in. Doesn't really matter, you could attach it to the lens first of all. And these are easier to use if you just use one of the rings. They come in sets of 3. I'd start with the middle size one and see how I get on with that. You can combine all of them together, but depending on what you're photographing, there's lots of options there for you. And then this is a Sigma macro lens, and it's kind of funky kind of way of being able to look at this. A true macro lens will allow magnification at 1:1 ratio. And as I said earlier, 1:1, what you're photographing on your sensor is exactly the same size in real life. I'm not going to require that you do 1:1 ratio, but I do want you to get closer in than just using a kit lens. And there's a lot of our lenses, and I think we've said this previously, they may have macro written on the lens, but it's not actually a true macro lens, and it's not going to be able to give you the results that you really want, and you don't want to look at that video. Okay, let's go back to where we're looking at here, and where are we? Assignment number 3, and I've flip-flopped these 2 weeks, so we're going to look at what is light and lens design part 1 next week. You know, simple lens types, chromatic aberration, lens flare, these are things that we'll catch up with. A simple lens is a single lens element. And the lenses that we use in photography, they're compound lenses. That is to say that multiple simple lens elements are combined together within the structure of the lens. And that's to give you better optical performance, but also adjust for aberrations. And chromatic aberration is one, spherical aberration is another, various types of lens flare. There's iris flare, there's coma. All of these things we'll come back and we'll talk about a bit later. We'll be doing diagrams, technical diagrams, so that we'll understand why and how these aberrations occur. And we'll do diagrams that are going to explain why a smaller aperture is going to render greater depth of field. And we're going to understand the actual mechanics of why that actually happens. So all of that is yet to come. But your macro assignment, and that's the last thing I want to look at here. And sorry, it's not quite lined up on the page. See if I can improve that just a little bit. Macro assignment, I'm going to keep the due date the same, 6/7/21. You may not finish everything today, but you can certainly get started. Close detail of text from an old book. You know, get your exposure right for this. If you overexpose, you're going to lose some of the texture detail of the paper. And if you get a really good old book, the texture of the paper itself can be really interesting. Close detail of a piece of jewelry. Be very aware of mixed lighting when you're doing this. You don't want to have reflections of artificial light reflected in the shiny metal. And using natural light would be my recommendation for that. Close detail of a plant, you may want to get in the studio with that and use studio lighting. And likewise with an insect, if you find a dead insect, I think would be my recommendation. But you know, things like dragonflies and butterflies and moths, you know, often we can find those things and we'll be able to work in the studio with that. 12 images required in total. And I would like you to have everything complete by the due date here. You may not get everything done, at least get shooting something today. And remember that I do need you to use some kind of macro lens or an extension tube for this. Sometimes you can get those screw-in elements that go into the front of the lens as well for magnification. Generally speaking, you're going to have optical issues with those. They can be quite interesting. They can be used creatively, but there's all sorts of chromatic aberration in particular that you get with that. Chromatic aberration leaves you with color fringing around the edge of sharp objects that are in focus in your image. Okay, that's enough from me. Just dive in, have at it. I'd recommend that you would, on your own time, go and look at a couple of the videos that I've mentioned and shown you in here as well. And Google Dom Camerecka. Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? Dom Camerecka. Write down his name and Google him and see what you can find. All right, that's it for now.